Hi guys. If you think you know how to learn, think again, because my guest today devoted their life to this very question. What is the best way to learn anything? Let me say it again. What is the best way to learn anything? Want to know the secrets? Stay with us. Hi, and welcome to my channel. My name is Dr. Rועי, and in this channel, I host and speak with the most prestigious, with the most important scholars from all around the world to discuss science, politics, religion, artificial intelligence, and the science of learning. And today, I'm more than privileged to speak with the Bjorks. And I have today two of the most important scholars in the field of learning, memory, and forgetting. They are Professor Robert and Elizabeth Bjork. And yes, they are couples, they are married. They run the Learning and Forgetting Lab in the UCLA, and they won so many prizes that it will be impossible to mention. So let me just say they are the best. And if it's not enough, in my second book, Enlightenment version 2.0, I devoted an entire chapter to the most important theory of all, desirable difficulties. So Bob and Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much. How are you today?
We're doing well, and we're looking forward to the opportunity to talk about the topics that interest you, and I think interest your audience, interest anybody who's interested in schooling and learning and their own learning, their kids' learning.
And be human, because learning is part of what makes us human. So yes. If you're interested in being human, so you should be interested in this talk. Now, as I mentioned before, we will start with the hard questions and move on to the harder one, okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I start with you, Rob. According to Wikipedia, you have a BA in math. Now, I would say that many scholars today in the field of education just don't understand what it takes to be successful in the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And many of the theories just lack the understanding that some aspects, some procedure of learning are profoundly different in humanities and in the science. So I want to start, A, would you agree with my observation? And B, how do you think that your math background helped you in your career as a psychologist?
Well, I guess I can start. I mean, we think the distinction, for example, between what we call storage strength, retrieval strength, or decades ago, researchers referred to by different names, but the difference between whether something's accessible right now, some knowledge you need in the present of the various cues that are available, which we refer to as retrieval strength, it's had different names. The distinction between that and what we tend to call storage strength, namely how sort of interrelated what it is you're trying to recall, you're trying to learn with everything else that's that you might know or might have been exposed to. So that distinction between retrieval strength, what's accessible right now in the presence of the cues that are available, recency plays a big role, how recently you've gone over it, and storage strength is sort of fundamental. And also, I'm kind of bypassing your question. I'll probably get back to it eventually.
Yes, yes. I just wanted to ask you, how does it relate to
I'm being like a politician at the moment. I'm going around, but
I must tell you,
a basic thing.
You're old enough. You can say whatever you want.
That's right. That's right. We just that's a privilege, I guess, that comes with age. But I mean, students, all of us can be so fooled by what we call retrieval strength. We can recall something now because of recency, we've just been over it, because there's cues in the present situation that narrow down the alternatives. But what we're often interested in is, with students or ourselves, is the durability of this. Will you be able to recall this information at a later time? Or if the situation changes where this what you've learned is now relevant in a new context, will you be able to access it? And that depends on what we've called storage strength. And I guess a basic thing before getting back to your more specific question is we're all vulnerable to getting sort of fooled by retrieval strength. A student can think they're prepared for an exam just due to the familiarity they feel when they look at the book again, or but the conditions that will maximize learning in the most fundamental sense, the storage strength sense, are often very different than the conditions that will maximize retrieval strength. And I don't know if you want to add something to that, Elizabeth.
Well, yeah, I would just want to say about being fooled. It's very hard to tell when you're actually learning versus when you're doing things that feel like you're learning, but really all they're doing is maintaining your performance. And as soon as, so for example, well, a classic sort of example is you look up, in the old days, you used to look up a telephone number in the directory, and now you're walking over to your phone to call it. And while you're doing that, you're saying 475-1943, 475-1943 until you can pick up the phone and dial it. You can tell this was a while ago, but it would still work with your iPhone. You sometimes have to, after you found the number, you have to switch to another screen, and you want to make sure you don't lose that number out of your memory before you get to the screen where you're going to punch it in. So that seems like you're learning when you're doing that kind of rapid, sometimes we even refer to it as telephone rehearsal. But actually that does not lead to any sort of permanent storage of that information that you can retrieve later. And this we get fooled by this a lot. It's very hard for students to know when they're doing certain kinds of study strategies. Is this one in which I'm actually learning or not? And worse yet, the ones that kind of maintain your performance and seem to, where you seem most like you're learning, like math studying, for example, really, they're not at all building up storage strength. So maybe if you get tested on them immediately after you've looked at them and rehearsed them over and over again, they'll be okay. But if there's any delay in time or interruption where you have to do something else and come back to it, it's not going to be accessible to you, or not nearly as accessible to you as you thought it was. So those are the two things we have to sort of constantly keep reminding people. It's very hard. Our intuitions are not a good guide to whether you're actually learning or not. And what are good guides to whether you're learning is whether you're doing the kinds of strategies that we advocate called desirable difficulties.
Okay, but just a second, because you gave me a wonderful answer for questions that I didn't ask. So let me activate my Israeli mode and be a little bit more wood. When I spoke with Barbara Oakley, okay, let me put it on the table because I think it is profoundly important. When I spoke with Barbara Oakley, I told her, listen, the entire MOOC revelation, I can say Coursera was founded by Daphne Kohler and Andrew Nigg, two computer science professors from Stanford University, Udacity, Sebastian Thurn, edX, it seems like the entire educational revolution in the last 10 years was carried out by people from the STEM. And I would say that this is not by chance. There is a profound misunderstanding in the humanities, and especially in the educational faculties, about what it takes to become a better STEM, math, engineering, computer science student. And when in those faculties, they come up with theories, they can't back it up with data because, again, they don't understand. I would say, again, that there is a profound difference between learning in the humanities and learning in the math. And I come back to you, Bob. Since you master two of them, would you agree or say, no, if you're learning, you learn it. So you can learn how to shoot basketball, and you can learn the humanities, and you can learn calculus. So again,
I think one thing we've been surprised about probably is just how general these principles are. Whether you're applying in a domain of motor skills, whether they're in mathematics, learning mathematics, whether they're in the physical sciences, and for that matter, in humanities, there's still all of the dynamics that have to do with connections, interconnections between things, between the power. I mean, so for example, we've tried to emphasize that recalling information in any domain does much more than just reveal that it's in your memory. When you recall it, a whole bunch of important things happen. It becomes more recallable in the future. Things in competition with it become less recallable. Very unique thing about human learning and memory. And also, we potentiate subsequent learning of information after we've made an attempt to recall something. So it's really, in fact, a thing somewhat surprising. Right now, researchers in education are looking at the pre-testing. That is, your students, you're coming to a lecture and the instructor asks you questions on the material that's about to be covered. And the surprising thing is you're no better than close to chance as a students to answer those questions. The material hasn't been presented, but that pre-testing seems to increase the efficiency. You activate what relevant knowledge you do have, apparently, even though you can't come up with a specific right answer. And that lets you encode more effectively the material when it is presented. So there's been a lot of what are called broadly test effects, the benefits of retrieval practice and the benefits of now pre-testing.
And this relates to, this is probably something you've heard. People are concerned that the invention of the internet and Google makes all this information immediately available to us. And what's happening to our memories? Are our memories getting bad because we can Google for anything that all the things that we used to know, everybody's phone numbers and whatnot, we don't bother to learn them anymore. But we have some grad students who are showing just what Bob was talking about, that if you're trying to think of something and you sort of think, maybe I knew that once or sounds kind of familiar, rather than just Googling it and finding the answer, you should try to search your own memory first. Now, maybe you won't find the specific item that you're looking for or the specific answer that you're looking for, but what you will activate is information related to that. And so then when you do get the opportunity to use Google and find out the correct answer, you learn it better. And not only do you learn it, and when I say better, I mean in a way that you can retrieve it and hold on to it later. You not only learn that new information better, but you have made the other information that you tried to think about that was related, you made that stronger. So you're exercising your memory and increasing these connections between things that you knew and new information that you're learning about. If you just, this is just a device that will make our use of Google not hurt us, but actually help us to create a more connected, a more elaborate kind of encoding of that information than
okay. Now, for those in my audience who are unfamiliar, and this is very unfortunate, for those who are unfamiliar with the concept of desirable difficulties, what Elizabeth is trying to say is that when you try to pop or to remember something deep in your memory and you have this, and this is difficulties, it feels uncomfortable, but the entire theory says, yes, it is difficulties, but it's desirable. When you perform this uncomfortable task, the thing, the item, once you can retrieve it to your memory, and even if you can't retrieve it, the next time you will try, it will be much easier. So this is a concept of a difficulty, which is desirable. Now, with your permission, I think that in order to start explaining your theory and go inside, we need to define one very important term, which is called metacognition, okay? Now, metacognition, I will give my lame, unprofessional definition, is like thinking about thinking, but you probably can do it much better than me.
No, it's funny. It's an awkward term. People find it, but really it subsumes people's belief about how they learn, and more specific things like I think you know, when the students, we often emphasize the students when they're preparing for exam, they're exercising these metacognitive processes. They are making judgments about whether this is something they knew well enough that they can stop studying it, that this other thing they should spend their time on. So there's a whole series of judgments that we make about whether we know something. And then also part of metacognition is we have beliefs about how we should learn.
Okay, you know, so let me just rephrase it with your permission. I'm sorry. So metacognition is two things. One is our beliefs about how should we learn, what is the best way to learn. This is our beliefs. And two is our toolbox that gives us the impression, the feeling that something that we have learned enough and we can move on to the next thing. And what we know from your research is this is crap. Okay, so the intuitive feeling and the belief system regarding how should we learn and when we have learned enough are not worth trusty. We shouldn't trust them. Okay,
that's right. No, good. I mean, even something as simple as if you're a student preparing for an exam or something like that, when you reread your notes or a chapter that you've done before, that you've read before, to try to make some judgment about whether this is material you need to study anymore. At low-level processes will increase your fluency of reading. There'll be a sense of familiarity and so on that can be very misleading. That as you look back over your notes or some part of a chapter, and as you read it, you will have a sense of fluency. But that is a poor measure. It's a poor measure of whether you will be able at a later time to generate that relevant information on your own in response to a question.
Now,
but it's very satisfying. I mean, as Bob said, it creates this illusion of comprehension. And I think it's why students report their most favorite, and also the study strategy they engage in the most, is to just read a chapter over and over and over again. And because then they're getting these sort of low-level inputs that, oh, this is familiar, I know this, I understand it, I've got it, I'm going to remember this. But you know, it truly is an illusion of understanding or comprehension.
I think that in my lecture, when I give lectures about this subject, the most surprising thing is the distinction between recognition and recollection, because the human mind was evolutionary designed to recognize things. Okay, I can see you, and I can see you after 20 years and say, hey, I recognize it's Bob. He owns me money. Okay, but the recollection is to get your picture, your mental picture out of my memory without an external clue. And this is extremely hard. And this is what we are supposed to do on external tests, okay? Because I won't see you in the test. I need to get you from the bottom of my mind all the way up to my consciousness. And this is extremely hard. And people more often than not confused between recognition. Okay, I know this paragraph, I know this chapter, I've reread it and reread, and I even mark it with a yellow marker. But when they need to take it out of memory without the aid of the external cue, it's almost impossible.
That's a very good summary. I mean, we sometimes emphasize, you know, what's funny is that students who decide to get together and maybe have copies of old exams or something, and they take like turns trying to, you know, like you and I are working together. I ask you a question, you try to answer it, then I add anything I think. That process is exercising all the important things that we talk about in terms of simply trying to generate an appropriate question is an important thing. Trying to answer, collecting. Whereas if I just look over my notes again, or you know, or copy something down. I mean, a court stenographer can get every word in a, you know, whole session in court, copy everything down, and they will. This has actually been shown. They will know nothing about what this is about afterwards. That transcription mode does not lead to learning. So you need to exercise these, what we've sometimes said to summarize some research is students need to learn to output more and input less.
Yes, this is
one way or another, practice the retrieval process and don't spend so much time just exposing yourself. We don't, you know, we've emphasized that we don't work like any sort of tape recorder or other recording device. In almost every, I once taught a seminar where that was the structure of the whole sort of seminar, is all the ways we differ from any normal recording device.
Yes, I think Elizabeth Loftus, you know, who's studying memory from a very different aspect. She said, yes, we are not a recording device. We invent the memories, we erase the memories, we manipulate the memories. As a magician, I know that many people, when they recall the experience of the magic, they just recall the experience and they just can't trace back and figure out what actually has happened. Now, let me give you my theory, and I would like to know what you think about it. You know, in Israel, when we have tests in the university, we have two chances for the students to take tests. There is like the first chance, and if they fail, they have another chance. And more often than not, after the first test, and the lecturer solve the first test in front of the class. And many students who didn't show up for the first test come to see, you know, this workout thing, and they say, wow, this was a very easy test. This was a very easy test. Why did I miss it? And on the second chance, they often fail because it's very different when you have the lecturer who is guiding you through the processes, through the procedure, who knows where should you go left and where should you go right. And it feels like this is a very easy test. But when you don't have the lecturer with you, it's very hard to solve the test. Would you agree about this thing?
No, that's a great summary. I don't have to add much to that. I mean, but also instructors inadvertently do other things that mislead students. So for example, in math and physics, those kind of courses, you know, there's always problem assignments. But by far the most typical thing is that 3 or 4 or 5 problems in a row all involve a certain kind of algorithm. That is, you know, at a low level, they might all be testing students' ability to use the Pythagorean theorem.
Yes, and this is where we go to the interleaving theory.
Yeah, and so what happens is that's a kind of crutch that this problem is going to involve the same sort of machinery to solve it as the other. And so Douglas Rohr, who teaches at the University of South Florida, has done this very important work in actual learning. It's algebra, I believe, right?
Algebra,
yeah.
Yeah.
In classrooms, and a year-long project, and shown just very large positive effects that come from interleaving and from not giving cues that, part of the challenge is to know what does apply to this problem, not to be given that and then asked to use it.
I want to just touch back to your comment about the students' misperception that, oh, this is an easy task. And then when they're on their own taking a similar task without the instructor guiding them through it, it all of a sudden, wow, why is this so hard? One thing I learned as a teacher was when I was giving students practice tasks, like old exams and so forth to look at, I think is a very helpful way for them to learn. And not only and also to get a feeling for what are the things that you feel this instructor feels are important. What are they things that they tend to ask about? But I always I learned to make them take the practice test without the answers. Because I said, if I give you one with the answers on it, all you'll do is say, oh yeah, I knew that. That's the one I would have picked. Or, if it's a multiple choice, that's the answer I would have picked.
This is great. This is what I tell my students all the time. There is a whole of difference between looking at the answers and say, hey, I understand, and going through this process by yourself. Let me just say you that there is a very famous dialogue from Plato, Meno. And in this dialogue, Socrates tried to explain the Pythagorean theorem to the slave just by asking questions. And then the premise of the dialogue that he had it all inside him. Now, the British philosopher Gilbert Ryle once wrote a paper about what if at the very beginning of the dialogue, Socrates just forget how to prove Pythagorean theorem. How would this conversation look like? If he doesn't know in advance, how should he take the course? And this is an hilarious article because
we should get that, I guess.
If you don't know, this is so funny because Gilbert Ryle was touching. Socrates was bluffing. If you don't know in advance where should you go, you don't go there in such an easy pace. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, Elizabeth, let me ask you something about interleaving. Okay, because I think that interleaving is it's very counterintuitive. First, let me just say interleaving is very counterintuitive. Now, your example right now is reasonable, okay? Let's say that I see a worksheet named Pythagorean theorem, okay? So I have all these questions on the page. I apply one very simple rule about Pythagorean. I need to do it. How do you pronounce Pythagorean theorem?
That's
pretty close. Pythagorean.
Pythagoras was the guy's name.
Yeah, Pythagoras. Okay. But if I don't know in advance how should, in what tool should I use, it's much harder. But I think that the most common or the most famous example regarding interleaving is about, painting styles, okay? This is what you gave, like painting style. Let's say that I give you I give you 10 images of Edward Manet, and then I give you 10 pictures of Picasso, and then I give you 10 pictures of Van Gogh. And then I say, okay, try to learn the painting style of the painter. And when you interleave those paintings, people report that the learning is much harder. People report using the metacognition, which is crap, that they learned much worse, but people perform much better. So could you explain me, and again, this is very counterintuitive, why if I show you an interleaved bunch of photos, it is better than I just show you, okay, this is Picasso, this is Picasso, this is Picasso, okay? Try to get the gist out of it, okay? I know, I believe your studies, I believe your results, but could you please give me something to hold on?
Well, first of all, I should clarify for your audience that what you're talking about is what kind of system will increase your ability later when you see a new painting to say who painted it.
Yes.
You know, you've studied, this is a painting you haven't seen before.
Yeah.
So what's important is whether you've learned the style.
Yes, it's not a memory test. It's a truly
right.
understanding test, yes.
It's a very important type of learning. I mean, the painting's a good example, but for example, physicians who have to look at x-rays and diagnose whether there's a malignancy, they haven't seen this x-ray. This is new. This is a new patient. And so what happens if, I mean, I don't know that we ever did any experiment that gets cited so much, it's online so much, is when you see several paintings by one artist in a row, you have this strong sense, I get this, I'm getting it, this style.
Yes, yes.
I feel like I'm getting it.
Well,
and then you change another one. Oh, I got this guy, all the pastels, this and that. And by contrast, when you interleave those same paintings task, people have this sense of, like they're almost
Total
jarred.
confusion.
it's much harder to remember what was 2 paintings ago. So how does it possible? How? Could you just give me an explanation, a plausible explanation?
Yeah, I think, what it appears, our original work on this has triggered a huge amount of other work, is what interleaving does is to help you notice key differences among the painters rather than what's similar, because you may notice from seeing several paintings by one artist in a row, you may extract something about the use of pastels or whatever. That may not be diagnostic. When I'm later showing you paintings, that may not help you distinguish between that painter and someone else who uses a lot of pastels. But when they're interleaved, the reason this research got so much attention,
this is a nice explanation,
that the result is unintuitive to most of us, but also we happened after the final test where they had to say what artist had painted each of a series of brand new paintings. We just kind of all just threw in this question at the end: what helped you learn better, having them interleaved or blocked? And what was just so amazing is the participants tended to learn substantially better over and over in different experiments from interleaving. But even after they performed better on this test of categorizing new paintings or new butterflies, or now it's been all sorts of new birds, when they're asked what helped you learn better, they still say blocking.
And this is part of what we said about metacognition. Now, this is the first time that I hear a plausible explanation. So that interleaving emphasizes the difference between different painting styles and not the similar.
Yes.
And the different might be more helpful when I want to distinguish between this painting style and this painting style.
Yes, and now when there's a new one, you've had to extract what distinguishes this painter from another. It typically in this experiment you see whether interleaved or blocked, you see 4 or 5 paintings from a given painter.
This is great. This is the essence of this YouTube channel is I get to ask questions. It strikes me I think for the last 5 years, I get to ask, the scholars themselves. This is great. This is why I'm here. Now,
it's
Elizabeth,
amazing who all you've asked.
Now, when Bob talked about interleaving about different painting styles, and we interleave with there is a multiplication math problem and division math problem.
Right.
But how should interleaving practice should be far away? So it can be, we basically doing the same thing. We are doing different painting style, but I'm not going of one painting style and then learn French and then learn something else.
Right.
So for example, let's say that I'm a student and I want to learn to my exams. So I learn physics and I learn English and I learn history. Interleaving is inside the field of physics. Should I interleave the sub-subjects, or should I interleave, everything, like do 30 minutes acceleration and then go to history and then go to...
Yes, boy, we've sometimes said there's about
several different dissertations.
Multiple doctoral dissertations waiting to be done to answer. Even something what we've sometimes referred to as the chunk size. I mean, we know that it's not optimal for a student to do what they think is optimal. Namely, if they got a couple exams coming up, they think I'll spend all of this block of time working on this one course and all in the other. We know that's not optimal, but how often you should go back and forth, and even something as basic as, if
and how far
should
away?
you interleave? Is it? This is so crucial to do. We almost wish we had a whole other career ahead of us. Should you interleave the things that are potentially confusable? So if there's things in physics and mathematics that people tend to, excuse me, get confused about, should those be interleaved? You better say something. I got it.
Yeah, these are all one is what should the chunk size be? Like if I'm going to be interleaving different topics, how much time should I spend on topic A before I switch to topic B and then C and then back to A and so forth? We don't know the answer to that question, and it probably depends on the type of material. And another thing is, what you were getting at, what should the relationship be between these bodies of material that you're looking at?
But I think that I got an answer. So if we should interleave between confusable subjects, so I should interleave math and physics, I should interleave in anatomy, I should leave, the cardio and the vascular, but interleave between physics and history doesn't help you much.
We don't know. We think they probably should be related for it to work the best.
We think, that it will help you. It'll be a desirable difficulty to try to sort out those possible confusions by interleaving them. And, but I mean, it really is in some ways the most, we've known about spacing effects for a long time. I mean, it's one of the most robust things.
Ever since Ebbinghaus.
Yes, I mean, if you want to start from beginning, it was there. And
anyway, one of my next question is related to Ebbinghaus and the spacing effect.
Yeah.
I came prepared, I told you.
Good timing, yeah. But I mean, so we've known about the spacing effect, but teachers, this is for any teachers that might be watching. There've often been a reaction when we talk about just the power of spacing the repetitions of when you cover certain material. There's been a reaction like, well, I can't, I've got this material to cover. I can't have the students take the rest of the class doing some unrelated activity and whatever and come back. I've got to cover these topics. The important thing in that respect about interleaving, it's a way to create spacing, but in the same total time. That is, it doesn't take you more time as a teacher to cover material in an interleave fashion than it does blocked. It will probably, though, and this is a crucial thing for any teachers listening out there, it will probably lower the student ratings of your teaching. to do interleaving.
At least for a while.
For a while.
Okay.
Once they learn, once they realize they're learning better.
I think that our education system, you know, there is like an external state exams in Israel, like it's called, you know, like it's not like the SAT, it's before, it's the national finals, yes, national finals, and the ministry and the Minister of Education decided this week to cancel many, I think all the humanities tests, just beside grammar, and give like not an external, it's going to be an internal in-school test. So our education system, I don't want to discuss, but I do want to discuss another thing regarding interleaving. And I will give you, I will tackle it from two different aspects, okay? As a Jew, observant Jew, we know that we need to focus on something. When you learn the Torah, sometimes you need to concentrate and concentrate and concentrate and concentrate. And just after many hours of concentrate, you come up with something valuable. If you don't into this world of Judaism, the concept of flow, the concept of deep work, the concept that you need to focus and focused, and you need to get everything in space and in place and just focused until you produce something valuable. But this concept is in some way against the concept of interleaving, where I study for 1 hour and then I interleave for something else. When I need to write an important paper, when I need to think about an important algorithm, I can't interleave. So my question is, should interleaving be something for our students? And as scholars, we need to focus and focus and focus and focus until we get something valuable, or it is also something that we should apply as scholars, okay? Because again, I know, and I think that you feel also, that 1 hour plus 1 hour is very different from 2 hours straight.
Yes.
What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, it's kind of crucial for people to sort of realize that forgetting enhances learning. I mean, it's a very hard thing. Namely, when you space, you do other things before you come back to the material. And you will definitely have a sense when you come back to it that it's some of it's sort of been forgotten or it's unfamiliar or something. But that very process of bringing it back to a state where it's familiar and fluent is very powerful. That is the same sense that, you know, students may even say, have a feeling like, oh, I had this before and now I'm struggling to get back to where I was. Well, the struggling to get back to where you were is going to be something that's going to enhance your ability to recall now at a longer time. So each time something's spaced and you kind of bring it back or reactivate it, it will then remain accessible for a longer period of time. So it probably applies to the Torah, and
it applies to you when you both write papers, and you both like brainstorm about, you do interleaving, you like, okay, it's 1 hour, it's 60 minutes, we did 2 pomodoros, let's move on to something else. Okay, listen, I want to sit and think and rethink about it, because I would say again that there is a difference between a student struggling to get this concept and a scholar trying to figure out something completely new. Elizabeth, what do you think?
Well, I know there's sometimes we're put in a situation where we don't have the luxury of doing something like spacing or interleaving or something. We have to get this job done in the next 20 minutes. But I think that if you have the time and this is a body material that you really want to learn, you want to have command over it, you want to be able to use it in different situations and so forth, then I think it's much better for you to do something that will put these kind of spaces in between your concentrated effort to learn that information. Now, you can also sometimes learn yourself. After 20 minutes, no matter how interested I am in this body of work, I start thinking about other things. So, or maybe you're more of a person who can go for 40 minutes before that happens.
Elizabeth, maybe because you are a millennial, so you can't focus too much, okay? Maybe you are a millennial. You were born after 85? So
just think how many writers, Isaac Asimov, Stephen King, anyone, they gradually develop a process where they let something sit, even for months sometimes, so that when they come back to it, they see some better way. That is, once it's hard to revise. We found this so much. we are so much better at revising each other's writing than we are our own writing. It's just, there's something just about that. But lots of these biographies about super prolific writers, and they also, almost everything differs from the way that students think these great writers work. They think they get great inspirations, and for 48 hours straight without leaving, they generate, without sleeping or whatever, they generate this masterpiece or something. And really, when you look at prolific writers, they get up at 8:15. They have
Stephen King writes for 3 hours each day.
Yeah, they write for this time. They take a walk in the countryside. They come back, they whatever, and they're done. And they want maybe 5 pages of new text per day. They first revise the 5 pages from yesterday, generate 5 more pages. That's it. That seems like nothing, but that creates a lot of books as weeks and time goes by.
Okay, this is nice. I need to think about it.
It also gives you a really good, I tell my students this too, that, if they have a term paper or something, don't write your term paper the night before. You'll be tired when you're doing it. There'll be things that seem clear to you as you're writing them.
Elizabeth, but I think that it's an advice like don't eat junk food. It's a great advice, just like don't eat junk food and exercise each day and go to sleep, sleep 7 days. There is a very nice Jewish joke about guys come to the doctor and say, listen, I feel terribly sick. So I say, okay, what is your schedule? And say, oh, I'm very tense. I say, okay, you should eat healthy and you should sleep 8 hours a day and stop smoking and stop. So the guy says, if I do all of your advices, I won't need you. Okay. So, anyway, this is a great advice, but it's
very hard to do.
Very hard to do. Now, we don't have much time, so I want to cover many other things. Bob, in your great TED Talk, your mutual TED Talk, you mentioned the difference between learning by doing and learning by watching, and you give the example of an airplane life-saving belts. You see this instructional video for 100 times, but when you need to do it for yourself, you are clueless. And you said, and I quote, one time of actually doing it would be worth more than dozens of passive observations. And you even said, if you do it once, I will give you a pin that says, follow me, I know how to do it. Okay? Yes. Now, on the other hand, there is a theory or the concept of mirror neurons that when I see a person perform an activity, approximately 20% of my neurons engage in mimicking this activity or mirroring it. And many people say that this is also a valid learning mechanism. Okay, I see you, 20% of my neurons activate as if I did what you just did. So in a way, I'm learning. Now, this is learning by seeing, this is learning by watching, not learning by doing. What's your take on this? So about learning by doing and the concept of mirror neurons.
No, I think there's some, athletes will practice a high jump or other ones like that. They will do a visualization, a kind of miniaturized practice of what they're going to do. And were it the case on the airplane that people would actually do something like imitate, but what they're doing instead is talking to their neighbor. Plus, but the person, like that example I gave, they are not showing you, for example, how to get the thing from under your seat. You don't even know whether it's going to be in some zippered bag or what, so they're just holding it up. Plus they're holding it up in the right way, and with a plane down and smoke and people screaming.
You don't know what.
You may not even know what's front and back of this thing. And so, yes, you have all that time to kill in an airport. There could be some little room off there where you just go. We've said, if you would do it once, go through the whole process, get the thing out from under your seat, open it up, put it on, get the breathing tube out, whatever, go over somewhere where they've got a window-sized thing and do it one time would be worth more than these dozens of passive exposures we get. And that generalizes to a lot of other kinds of circumstances as well.
So let me say differently, mirror neuron is a great thing. Kudos to Risoletti, but as a learning mechanism, learning by doing is much more efficient.
Much more efficient. And people, you will see sometimes, we've seen this a little bit watching some of our gymnastics, particularly women's team at UCLA. They will do a kind of miniaturized version of the exercise. So there are things, but the doing is really very crucial. We once I chaired a committee that was advising the U.S. Army on training, and if you go to various kinds of stations, training bases, you'll see soldiers lined up. One of them is shooting at a target or doing something. The rest are all lined up to take their turn. And that is really a waste of time. That you want people to be doing an exercise. And we've advised a prominent soccer coach in England about this, about not lining his kids up
to watch,
but to have them interleave the different activities. That is, they should be able to go and try throw in from the side, or try a penalty kick, or a certain type of pass. And this hasn't been done as rigorous experimentation, but he's reporting pretty amazing benefits of interleaving the practice activies.
Yeah.
Okay.
And not just improving their skill learning, but also their enthusiasm for the whole, a lot of kids don't like to go to soccer practice or basketball practice. They want to play the game of soccer, and they want to play the game of basketball. And this, now your practice is much more, much similar to what happens in a real game, or what happens. And so the students get really excited about it. He said they start coming early to practice. They want to stay longer.
I think that this is what we know from the work of Anders Ericsson regarding deliberate practice.
Yes.
Playing the game is not the same as practicing. This is very different. Okay, so I have 3 more questions, and I save the hardest to last. Okay, so far it was fun. Let's move to the hardest questions. Let me start. You mentioned over and over again the idea that learning is not equal performance. Okay, when you think performance or is how you do when you study, and learning is like a full committed change, permanent change in your way of thinking. And I want to ask a rude question with your permission, and maybe learning in the context of all of those psychology experiments is different than learning in the real world. Let me explain. When we had the work of Ebbinghaus, he tried to learn like meaningless words. William James, again, same thing. Try to learn, just try to memorize poetry or meaningless thing. When we try, you know, the scuba diving, the context-dependent memory experiment, we just memorize list of words. Maybe, as you say, that performance is unequal to learning in the context of psychology experiment is unequal to real learning in the real world, and one cannot extrapolate from the other. Now,
you know, it's a legitimate question, and I remember distinctly in my own case a kind of worry that
you are
the
not
laboratory experiments we were doing
this question.
You know, the things we were doing with paired associative materials, this and that it wouldn't be extend. But I will tell you the truth. Now, when those people have done research in law school training and athletics and whatever, the effects we saw in these highly controlled laboratory things were underestimates of the benefits. You know, when you super control paired associates and whatever else, you're getting control it one way, but in another time you're also constraining a situation so much there's not quite an opportunity. So some of the benefits that have been, you know, even things like there's a bunch of things in the schools now, but one of the most impressive is the dean of the Florida Law School. Remember which school? Florida International. Got familiar with some of these results and decided they would incorporate all the things we talked about today, retrieval practice, interleaving, a whole bunch of things. And it made for a very different law school curriculum. But after they introduced that, they were able to go from about fourth among Florida law schools in the rate of passing the bars to first place several years in a row. And the crucial thing was the entering credentials of their students predicted about fourth place compared to the entering credentials of other Florida law schools. So the thing that's so important about this, and if we had time, we'd tell you a couple other examples, introducing desirable difficulties, various ways of optimizing, interleaving stuff, it more than made up the difference in the preparation that these students had. Yeah. They had a less good preparation, but these manipulations during law school more than made up for that. That gets us excited because we think, you know, it's early disadvantage. This would go much earlier with young children who are in impoverished backgrounds and so on. You know, that's such a critical period. You worry, can I make up for the disadvantages they get? College is too late. But I realize I'm sort of rattling on here, but the short answer is simply, it's an entirely legitimate question, one we worried about. But now it looks like we underestimated some size of benefits of things like interleaving and so on by having sort of sterile, restricted laboratory tests like paired associates, and that the real world.
This is a very good answer, which leads me to question number 2 out of 3. And this is another hard question. Now, I'm a great fan of the ancient, and there is a quote from the British mathematician Whitehead that all Western philosophy is only footnotes to the work of Plato. Now, the ancient were masters of learning. They must have known this concept of desirable difficulties. There is a famous ancient Jewish quote, "Lepum tsara agra," which basically translates to no pain, no gain, but in the context of learning. Yeah. So how come when I say desirable difficulties nowadays, it's go to the Bjork. The Bjork like coined this term, the Bjork invented this concept, but this concept was known to the ancient. So what happened from the ancient to until the the learning and forgetting lab at UCLA was founded? How did we forget this so profoundly important concept?
You should write an article on this, yes, because it's such a good question. I mean, what we've often done is show, like in talks we've given, you can show slides with quotes from not just those philosophers, but people like William James, the end of the 1800s and so on, where they're basically saying something like the principle of retrieval practice, or I mean, there's quotes you can give that illustrate this. So your question about if they knew it and if it's all that time, what happened in our educational system that we don't incorporate these things?
And let me emphasize, just a second before Elizabeth, you answer, let me emphasize, we know it all the way in sports, you know, no pain, no gain, you need to do, and this is hard. When you go to the gym, if you want to progress, there is some difficulties you must attain. So it seems like we became spoiled in the context of the educational system, and you need to say, listen, I know what you feel, but I will give you a lollipop. Yes, it's a desirable, it's a sweet difficulties. Would you agree, Elizabeth?
Yes, and I would say, I think, as Bob's saying, you should write something up on this, because historically I don't know all of this, how to justify all of this. But somewhere in our school systems, at least here in the United States, and I think really worldwide, people came to believe that learning should be fun. If you're not having fun, then you're not doing the right thing. And it means, and there were a lot of implications of that. One is that, well, this just isn't your thing. You're not going to be able to learn this because it seems difficult to you. And the other was that failing is a bad thing to do. Making errors are a bad thing to do. Really, we don't learn unless we make errors. They teach us what was it that we were doing right, and now what is it that we need to change and adjust and do differently to succeed. And so I think that those sort of feelings among instructors and principals and administrators that learning should be only fun and we shouldn't ever put students in a situation where they'll fail, that failing is a bad thing. No, failing is one of the prime ways that we learn. And we should teach students to think, if it feels difficult to you, just keep persisting, and think of it, because it seems difficult because you're learning.
And and your theory, I wouldn't be so needed when you were high school students, because no one thought in those days that learning must be fun. Okay, you should learn, that's it, end of story. Would you agree, Bob?
No, that's right. And someone you may also want to interview in this series some point is our colleague, Jim Stigler, who's done very important work in the schools. And one of the early things he did was videotaping studies of algebra instruction, I think it was, in Japanese, United States, and German schools. And it was so instructive and the achievement level is so much higher in the Japanese than the US, and that was what motivated, what were they doing differently? But so many things he noticed. For example, what was rewarded there was a student going up to the board and showing how they worked on this thing. That was the rewarded activity, whether that led to the right answer or not, to say how you did it. In the US classroom, the teacher would ask and a kid would raise a hand, they'd start to answer, no, and then they'd turn to another kid. And so there were all these kind of differences that fit very well with what we know about learning. And even something he didn't always amaze me.
Even in Japan.
In Japan, his videotaping classrooms showed that something like 40% of United States class sessions get interrupted by a loudspeaker announcement about bring your something tomorrow. And that was like zero in the Japanese classrooms. And they couldn't understand how anybody, the instructors couldn't understand how anyone would permit, you know, they think of the lesson as a kind of unfolding narrative where things are linked. And how could you have an announcement break up that style?
Yes,
so some of those things.
There are many differences between Western and Eastern societies, especially with regard to how they perceive learning. Now, which leads me to, no, it doesn't lead me, but this is the last question. And this is a personal question that interests me. You are both distinguished scholars and a married couple. Not only this, but you also work together intensively for several decades. And since I also work with my wife, I need some advices. But please don't give me this usual, don't start your work, your thesis the night before, okay? Give me some real hard, real life advices.
Well, it's just interesting his background, that our career has been long enough that we spanned the time early in our career. If you were a married couple, you could not both have professorial positions in the same department. And usually then if the university hires something, it was virtually always the woman who'd get some adjunct position or something in another department. So, and then there was a period after, due to actions of the United States government, actually, you could not keep that practice up. But then you were expected as a married couple to work on very different things. That wasn't okay to work on the same topic. So Elizabeth had early in her career, she worked on processes of perception and some infant learning, children learning, just partly to have something different than what I was doing. And then very gradually it became okay to collaborate, but we've co-authored an article, I'm not sure I'll come up with the number, it was almost...
it's at least 20 years.
It was about 20 years from when we were married that we first felt like we could both be authors on an article.
Yeah.
But now it's changed so much that now it can be a strategy of a university department to hire a couple who can then maybe afford to own a house if you're in a place like Los Angeles.
So let me ask you differently. If the university would have allowed you to work together from the moment you got married, like not 20 years ago, would it be much more difficult? Because, 20 years in marriage life, it's a lot of time. You learn, to get to know each other, but working together after 3 years of marriage seems much harder.
Well, it is complex. So for example, when we came to UCLA, they gave us offices right next to each other. And after a little bit of that, we said, could we please be not right next? It's fine to have a single laboratory that we would run participants and stuff. But I mean, part of that was just that, Elizabeth would be working in her office and a student looking for me comes and say, they feel free to say, do you know where Dr. Robert Bjork is?
Can I give you this and you'll give it to him?
Yeah. and we said, no, we don't want to be that. So it is, and then, some things I've gotten more credit for just because, Elizabeth always took on somewhat, we tried to divide some things, but she always took on somewhat more of the family things, particularly any kid's emergency when they were sick and so on. So it is, I don't know if there's more to say about it, but we feel like across our career, we've almost experienced every kind of stage of this.
Okay, my wife is not a faculty member, but we work together on so many projects. So my books and my YouTube channel, she's always with me, but it's very intense, you know, being a full-time co-author and edit your books, which is a very delicate, personal, intimate task, and run the house. But I think it was the effort.
You find out things. I'm better generating some original version of material. Elizabeth's a better editor. So sometimes you just accept some of those differences and to try to optimize things. But I don't know if we can.
Well, and I think we may have the advantage. I think the kind of situation where I don't think we have a lot of advice for people is if I have a very intense and different career and Bob has a very intense and different career. Now it's hard for us to just casually talk about, you know, what we're doing or our jobs, or what do you think about this? Or, you know, I've been thinking I should do this or give these people this answer. What do you think? Because he will have no idea what I'm talking about. And, but because now he mentioned for a long time, I went off in this other world and worked for a while. And then at that point, I don't think we were sharing ideas too much then. But I think because we're both interested in the same problems, that is an advantage so that we can, you know, like we said, you remember we were worrying, how in the world did this happen? Well, what if it was the case that blah, 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 and then the other one. And so we can.
We are both interested in the same problems. I think that this summarizes a lot of things. Guys, thank you so much. It's been a true privilege and honor for me speaking with you. After, you know, after many years that we're reading what you do and having many questions, finally, most of them were answered today.
Most of them.
Most of them, yes. You say almost now. I think we still have a little disagreement about the profound difference between the STEM and the humanities, but we leave it to the next talk. Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a true privilege. It was an honor speaking with you guys.
Okay, and congratulations on this series.
Yes.
This endeavor.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Okay.